They thought they were enforcing airline policy. They had no idea they were delaying the woman whose decision could redefine the airline's future. Morning sunlight spilled through the towering glass walls of Jefferson International Airport, painting long golden reflections across polished marble floors. Digital departure boards flickered overhead while rolling suitcases hummed across the terminal in every direction. Business travelers hurried toward their gates. Families gathered around coffee stands, and flight announcements echoed calmly through the vast concourse. It was organized chaos, the familiar rhythm of thousands of journeys beginning at once. Gate A27 stood near the end of the international terminal. In less than 30 minutes, Flight 482 would depart for San Francisco, carrying executives, investors, and government officials attending one of the country's most influential global innovation summits. Among them was one passenger who attracted almost no attention. Emily Carter stepped out of the moving walkway with a small black carry-on rolling quietly behind her. 25 years old, with shoulder-length blonde hair tucked neatly behind one ear, she wore a simple ivory blouse beneath a light gray blazer, dark tailored slacks, and comfortable navy flats. A slim silver watch rested against her wrist, while a worn leather portfolio remained tucked beneath one arm. There were no designer handbags, no luxury accessories, and nothing about her appearance suggested extraordinary wealth or influence. She looked like any young professional catching an early business flight. She preferred it that way. Emily glanced briefly at the boarding pass displayed on her phone before continuing toward gate A27 with calm, unhurried steps. Her expression remained peaceful despite the approaching boarding deadline. Inside the gate area, airline employees prepared for final boarding. Passengers lined up according to their assigned groups, exchanging polite conversation while checking phones and laptops one last time. Flight attendants welcomed travelers with practiced smiles as scanners emitted their familiar electronic chime. Everything appeared perfectly routine. Until Emily joined the line. Gate supervisor Rachel Dawson stood near the boarding scanner reviewing travel documents with mechanical efficiency. At 39, Rachel had built a reputation for maintaining strict procedures and refusing exceptions. Her Navy airline uniform was immaculate, every movement precise, every instruction delivered with quiet authority. As Emily reached the front of the queue, Rachel extended her hand. "Boarding pass, please." Emily smiled warmly and handed over her phone. "Good morning." Rachel scanned the digital pass. The device paused. A small notification appeared across the screen. Rachel frowned slightly. Instead of scanning again, her eyes drifted upward, studying Emily's simple clothing with careful skepticism. "You'll need to step aside for a moment." Emily remained composed. "Is something wrong?" Rachel didn't answer immediately. She examined the boarding information once more before looking back at Emily. "There appears to be an issue." Passengers waiting behind Emily exchanged brief glances. One businessman sighed impatiently. Another checked his watch. Emily nodded politely. "I understand. Could you tell me what the issue is?" Rachel folded her arms. "I'll need to verify a few things first." Her voice remained professional, but noticeably colder. Emily quietly stepped away from the boarding lane without complaint, allowing the next passengers to continue boarding. The line moved again. One by one, travelers disappeared down the jet bridge. Emily waited beside the gate windows overlooking the aircraft parked beneath the bright morning sky. She neither argued nor demanded special treatment. She simply watched another passenger board in front of her. Across the terminal, the loudspeaker announced that Flight 482 had entered its final boarding phase. Few people noticed the young woman standing patiently beside the window. Fewer still realized that before the aircraft reached cruising altitude, nearly everyone at Gate A27 would wish they had taken just one extra minute to learn who Emily Carter really was. The first assumption is rarely the one people remember. They remember the moment no one bothered to question it. Emily Carter remained standing beside the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the aircraft waiting at Gate A27. The morning sun reflected across the fuselage while baggage handlers completed the final preparations below. Beyond the glass, everything appeared perfectly on schedule. Inside the terminal, however, something had quietly shifted. Rachel Dawson glanced once more at the boarding screen before calling another gate agent closer. "Run her reservation again." The younger employee typed quickly. "It's valid." Rachel frowned. The ticket class? Executive Premier. Rachel looked up immediately. That's impossible. She studied Emily again. The simple blazer. The inexpensive carry-on. The worn leather portfolio. Nothing about the young woman matched the premium boarding category displayed on the monitor. There has to be a system error. Emily stepped forward slightly. May I help clarify anything? Rachel kept her attention on the screen. Please remain where you are. Passengers waiting nearby had begun noticing the delay. An elderly couple exchanged puzzled glances. A businessman carrying an expensive briefcase checked his watch with growing irritation. Two younger travelers quietly whispered while pretending not to stare. Emily folded her hands calmly around the handle of her suitcase. I have a meeting in San Francisco that's scheduled shortly after we land. Rachel finally looked at her. I'm sure everyone on this flight has somewhere important to be. The reply was polite, but unmistakably dismissive. Emily nodded. I understand. Rachel crossed her arms. Executive Premier boarding isn't issued by mistake. I'm aware. So explain why you're holding this ticket. Emily smiled gently. My assistant booked it. A faint laugh escaped one of the nearby passengers. Rachel's expression hardened. Your assistant? Yes. And what exactly do you do? Emily answered without hesitation. I lead a company. Rachel waited. When no further explanation came, she tilted her head. What kind of company? Emily remained composed. A technology company. Several nearby passengers smiled quietly, interpreting the answer as intentionally vague. Rachel did the same. I see. She tapped her radio clipped to her belt. Gate security, please report to A27. The words immediately changed the atmosphere. Conversation slowed. Several people stopped boarding altogether. A uniformed airport security officer approached within moments. Rachel pointed discreetly toward Emily. This passenger's boarding authorization requires additional verification. The officer nodded respectfully. Ma'am, would you mind stepping over here with me? Emily followed without resistance. Of course. The officer seemed almost apologetic. Thank you for cooperating. Emily offered a reassuring smile. I know you're simply doing your job. Rachel watched the interaction with quiet satisfaction. In her mind, procedures had worked exactly as intended. Final boarding was announced across the terminal. The line disappeared. The jet bridge stood nearly empty. Emily remained several feet away, separated from the departing passengers by nothing more than a retractable barrier and a series of assumptions. She removed her phone from her blazer pocket. Not hurriedly, not dramatically. She typed one short message. Please inform Mr. Harrison that I may miss our scheduled flight. She pressed send, then returned the phone to her pocket. No threats. No complaints. No demand to speak with a supervisor. Rachel noticed the message but dismissed it without another thought. To her, it looked like another traveler informing someone of a delay. What she could not possibly know was that the recipient was already seated inside the airline's Executive Operations Center. And less than 60 seconds after reading Emily's message, the owner of the airline stood up in the middle of a board meeting, ended the discussion without explanation, and walked briskly toward gate A27. By the time he arrived, the aircraft door would still be open, but the mistake waiting at the gate would already be impossible to close. Sometimes the longest walk in an airport isn't measured in distance. It's measured by the silence that follows a single mistaken judgment. Gate A27 had grown unusually quiet. Most passengers had already disappeared down the jet bridge, leaving only a handful of airline employees, the security officer, and several delayed travelers watching from nearby seats. The aircraft remained connected to the terminal, but its cabin door would not stay open much longer. Rachel Dawson glanced at her watch. We're holding this flight longer than necessary. The security officer shifted uneasily. Her boarding pass appears valid. Rachel answered without hesitation, then explained the reservation mismatch. The younger gate agent spoke carefully. The system still shows Executive Premier access. Rachel folded her arms. Exactly. She looked toward Emily again. Which doesn't make sense. Emily remained standing beside the window, one hand resting lightly on the handle of her suitcase. I've already answered every question you've asked. Rachel nodded. You answered. She paused. I simply don't believe the answers. A few passengers overheard the exchange. One woman quietly shook her head. Another man muttered, just let her board. Rachel ignored both comments. Airline procedure had become personal without her realizing it. Across the terminal, inside Skyline Air's Executive Operations Center, a conference room door opened abruptly. Chairman William Harrison stepped into the hallway with unusual urgency. Senior executives looked up in surprise. "Sir." His executive assistant hurried beside him. "Should I postpone the summit briefing?" William was already walking toward the elevators. "Everything." "What happened?" He held up his phone. One short message remained visible. "Please inform Mr. Harrison that I may miss our scheduled flight." Nothing more. No complaint. No accusation. Only quiet information. William's expression hardened. "Get airport operations on the line." Immediately. Back at gate A27, the boarding bridge attendant received another notification. "Captain wants the door closed." Rachel answered quickly. 2 more minutes. Emily calmly looked toward the aircraft. "If necessary, I'll take a later flight." Rachel seemed almost relieved. That may be the best solution. The words settled heavily over the gate area. One elderly passenger finally spoke. "Young lady, you've been very patient." Emily smiled warmly. "Thank you. I hope they figure it out." "So do I." No frustration appeared in her voice. Only kindness. The security officer quietly stepped closer. "Ma'am." Emily turned toward him. "I'm sorry this has taken so long." She offered a reassuring smile. "I know you're simply following instructions." He nodded gratefully. Rachel noticed the exchange, but remained focused on the departure monitor. Then every radio clip to the employees' uniforms crackled at once. "Airport operations to gate A27. Rachel answered. "This is Dawson." A brief pause followed. Then the dispatcher spoke. "Hold aircraft." Rachel frowned. "Reason?" "Executive directive." She blinked. "From whom?" Another pause. "The chairman." The surrounding employees exchanged confused glances. Rachel straightened immediately. "The chairman is coming here?" "Correct." "Estimated arrival?" "Less than 3 minutes." Silence spread across the gate. Even the passengers sensed something unusual. The captain called again from the aircraft. "What's causing the delay?" Rachel struggled to answer. "We've received executive instructions." Outside the terminal windows, a black electric airport vehicle appeared at the far end of the concourse road, moving far faster than normal service traffic. Inside the terminal itself, several airport directors emerged from a secured corridor, walking briskly toward gate A27 with expressions no one could quite read. Rachel's confidence began to fade. She had expected routine verification. Nothing about this looked routine anymore. Emily simply watched the approaching figures without changing her expression. She neither smiled nor appeared surprised. She had seen this kind of moment before. Not because people recognized her, because assumptions almost always lasted only until facts finally arrived. Within seconds, the chairman himself stepped into the terminal corridor. He ignored every manager attempting to greet him. His eyes searched the gate only once. Then he walked directly toward the quietly dressed young woman standing beside the window. The entire terminal seemed to stop breathing. The truth rarely announces itself with raised voices. Sometimes it arrives with a handshake that changes every face. In the room, Chairman William Harrison crossed the terminal with remarkable speed, followed closely by airport executives, operations managers, and 2 members of Skyline Air's leadership team. Employees instinctively stepped aside as he approached gate A27. Conversations faded into whispers. Even passengers waiting at neighboring gates sensed that something extraordinary was unfolding. Rachel Dawson straightened her uniform. "Mr. Harrison." She offered a professional smile. "We've identified a passenger whose reservation requires." He walked past her. Without slowing. Without answering. His attention never left the young woman standing quietly beside the window. Emily Carter looked up as he approached. For the first time that morning, a genuine smile appeared across William Harrison's face. "Emily." He extended both hands warmly. "I am so terribly sorry." The gate area fell completely silent. Emily accepted the handshake with calm grace. "Good morning, William. I received your message less than 2 minutes ago. I'm sorry to interrupt your meeting." "You didn't interrupt anything." His voice carried clearly enough for everyone nearby to hear. "We've been waiting weeks for today's summit." Rachel blinked in confusion. William turned toward the waiting aircraft before looking back at Emily. "They haven't boarded you?" Emily answered quietly. "There seems to have been some confusion." She never looked toward Rachel. She never mentioned the humiliation. She simply stated a fact. William's expression became noticeably more serious. He faced Rachel. What confusion? Rachel swallowed. Sir, there appeared to be inconsistencies regarding her executive premier reservation. The reservation is correct. Yes, but, and Ms. Carter's identity? Rachel hesitated. We couldn't verify. William interrupted gently. You didn't recognize her. The words landed harder than any raised voice. Several employees exchanged nervous glances. William stepped beside Emily. For anyone who hasn't had the privilege of meeting her, he paused briefly. This is Emily Carter. No one moved. The chief executive officer of Carter Nexus Technologies. The silence deepened. Our company has spent the last 6 months negotiating Skyline Air's largest technology modernization partnership. Several passengers looked at one another. Someone whispered softly, "The Carter Nexus?" William continued. The woman standing before you is scheduled to deliver this afternoon's keynote address at the Global Innovation Summit. He looked directly at Rachel. And our board has been waiting for her arrival since sunrise. Rachel's face lost all color. The younger gate agent covered his mouth in disbelief. Even the security officer lowered his eyes. Emily remained exactly as she had all morning. Calm, composed, unchanged. William sighed quietly. I've known Emily for 5 years. He smiled toward her. She insists on traveling without special treatment. Emily answered with a faint smile. It usually works. A few nervous laughs escaped the surrounding crowd. William nodded. Usually. He turned back toward the gathered employees. Today wasn't a failure of procedure. His voice remained controlled. It was a failure of judgment. No one attempted to argue. Rachel finally found her voice. Ms. Carter. She struggled to continue. I'm deeply sorry. Emily met her eyes for the first time. I believe you. The simplicity of the reply surprised everyone. No anger. No humiliation returned. Only quiet dignity. William gestured toward the jet bridge. The captain is holding the aircraft exclusively for you. Emily glanced briefly toward the boarding door before looking back at him. If the passengers have already been delayed because of me, perhaps we should all board together. William smiled. Even after everything, she was thinking about everyone else first. As Emily picked up her suitcase, the passengers instinctively stepped aside, creating a clear path without anyone asking. Moments earlier, they had watched an ordinary traveler being questioned. Now they watched one of the country's most respected CEOs walk toward the aircraft with exactly the same quiet confidence she had carried from the very beginning. The only thing that had changed was what everyone else finally understood. Real leadership is revealed not by how people respond to respect, but by how they respond after receiving an apology they never demanded. The aircraft door closed quietly behind the final passenger. Inside the spacious executive premier cabin, conversations gradually returned, but the atmosphere remained noticeably different. Several travelers glanced discreetly toward Emily Carter as she settled into her window seat, without the slightest sign of triumph. She placed her leather portfolio beneath the seat in front of her, fastened her seat belt, and looked out at the runway where sunlight shimmered across the wings. Nothing about her suggested someone who had just become the center of the airport's attention. Chairman William Harrison remained standing beside her seat for another moment. I'll be traveling on the next flight, he said softly. Emily looked up. You don't have to. I know. He smiled faintly. I want to. She understood immediately. There would be difficult conversations waiting after this aircraft departed. William nodded once before leaving the cabin. As soon as the aircraft door reopened briefly for his departure, the surrounding passengers remained unusually quiet. The woman seated across the aisle leaned toward Emily. I owe you an apology. Emily looked at her with gentle curiosity. For what? I assumed they had a reason. Emily smiled kindly. Most people did. The woman lowered her eyes. I'm embarrassed. Emily shook her head. Today isn't about embarrassment. It's about learning. The simple answer lingered longer than either woman expected. Several rows behind them, a businessman who had sighed impatiently at the gate quietly reflected on his own assumptions. He had judged Emily before Rachel ever spoke. He wasn't proud of that realization. Meanwhile, back inside Jefferson International Airport, Gate A27 remained closed while Skyline Air executives gathered inside a nearby conference room. Rachel Dawson sat silently across from Chairman Harrison. No one spoke for nearly a minute. Finally, William folded his hands. Tell me what happened. Rachel recounted every step exactly as it had occurred. She omitted nothing. Not the hesitation. Not the questions. Not the assumptions. When she finished, the room became still once again. William leaned back slowly. Did Ms. Carter ever raise her voice? No. Did she refuse cooperation? No. Did she demand special treatment? Rachel swallowed. No. Did she once mention her position? No. William nodded. Exactly. He looked around the room. Our procedures were never the problem. Our culture was. No one disagreed. He continued quietly. When appearance becomes evidence, professional judgment disappears. The words settled heavily over every manager present. Rachel stared at the conference table. I thought I was protecting the airline. William answered gently. I believe you. He paused. But protection without humility becomes prejudice. Rachel closed her eyes briefly. I understand that now. William slid a thin folder across the table. Inside were the preliminary agreements for Skyline Air's largest modernization project. Artificial intelligence flight operations. Passenger experience systems. Global security infrastructure. A partnership valued at nearly $300 million. Rachel looked at the cover page in disbelief. I almost cost us this. William corrected her calmly. No. You almost cost us something even more valuable. She looked up. Our reputation. Back aboard Flight 482, the captain announced takeoff clearance. The engines gradually increased in power. Emily watched the terminal drift farther away through the oval window. She thought briefly about Rachel. Not with anger. Not with satisfaction. Only with hope. Because she understood something that many leaders never did. Mistakes reveal character. But what people choose to do after those mistakes reveals something even greater. As the aircraft lifted smoothly into the bright morning sky, Jefferson International Airport grew smaller beneath the clouds. The summit waiting in San Francisco suddenly felt less important than the lesson that had quietly begun back at Gate A27. And before the day was over, Emily intended to make sure that lesson reached far beyond one airport, one airline, or one embarrassed supervisor. The most important speech Emily Carter would deliver that day wasn't the keynote waiting in San Francisco. It was the conversation that would determine whether one mistake became a turning point or merely another forgotten apology. The Global Innovation Summit occupied the top floor of the Bayview Convention Center overlooking San Francisco Harbor. Glass walls reflected the afternoon sun while leaders from technology, transportation, finance, and government gathered beneath towering digital displays announcing the future of intelligent infrastructure. Emily arrived only minutes before her scheduled address. No one would have guessed she had nearly missed the flight. She walked calmly through the backstage corridor with the same quiet confidence she had carried through Jefferson International Airport earlier that morning. William Harrison met her outside the main auditorium. I'm relieved you made it. Emily smiled. So am I. He hesitated. I've been thinking about what happened all flight long. I imagined you would. I've already instructed our executive team to begin a full review. Emily looked toward the auditorium doors. Reviews are helpful. She paused. But culture changes only when leaders become examples. William nodded slowly. I hope to become one. Moments later, the conference moderator welcomed Emily onto the stage. More than 2,000 attendees filled the auditorium. Thousands more watched through a worldwide live stream. Large screens displayed her name. Emily Carter, Chief Executive Officer, Carter Nexus Technologies. The audience applauded warmly. Emily stood behind the podium for several quiet seconds before beginning. This morning, she smiled gently. I almost didn't make it here. Soft laughter echoed across the room. But not because of traffic. The audience became attentive. I experienced something many people experience every day. She never mentioned Skyline Air. She never mentioned Rachel. She never mentioned Jefferson International Airport. Instead, she spoke about something much larger. We often believe discrimination begins with cruelty. She slowly looked across the audience. It usually begins with assumptions. The room became completely still. Emily continued. A person's appearance. A title. A profession. A suitcase. A neighborhood. Each sentence landed with remarkable simplicity. None of those things tell us who someone truly is. William listened from the front row without taking his eyes off the stage. Emily rested both hands lightly on the podium. Technology has transformed almost every industry represented in this room. She smiled softly. But no innovation matters if respect fails to evolve alongside it. Silence filled the auditorium. No one checked a phone. No one whispered. Emily never sounded angry. She never sounded wounded. Only sincere. When organizations teach employees to verify information, they reduce mistakes. She paused. When organizations teach employees to respect people before making assumptions, they transform lives. The audience erupted into sustained applause. Several executives stood, then dozens more. Within seconds, the entire auditorium rose together. William remained standing long after the applause faded. He realized Emily had done something extraordinary. She had protected the dignity of every person involved, even those who had failed her. Later that evening, Skyline Air's executive board met again. This time, the first slide projected onto the conference room screen carried a new title: Dignity Before Assumption Initiative. Rachel Dawson quietly entered the room at William's invitation. She looked surprised to find her name included on the leadership committee assigned to redesign employee training. William smiled. "I could have removed you." Rachel lowered her eyes. "I know, but people who learn from mistakes." He closed the folder in front of him. "Often become the strongest teachers." For the first time since that difficult morning, Rachel allowed herself a small, hopeful smile. Far above the Pacific coastline, the setting sun painted the evening sky in shades of gold. And somewhere between one delayed flight and one unforgettable speech, a single act of quiet dignity had already begun changing far more than an airline. Justice does not always arrive with punishment. Sometimes it arrives when people are given the chance to become better than the version of themselves they were yesterday. 3 weeks passed. The headlines surrounding Emily Carter's keynote had faded, replaced by new stories from the fast-moving world of technology. Yet inside Skyline Air, the events at Gate A27 remained impossible to forget. Every regional manager had received a copy of Emily's speech. Every training director had watched it twice. The words were no longer treated as a public relations moment. They had become the foundation for rebuilding the company's culture. Rachel Dawson noticed the changes almost immediately. The familiar checklists at her boarding gate had been updated. New training sessions focused not only on security procedures, but also on communication, unconscious bias, professional courtesy, and respectful verification. Employees practiced real-world scenarios where appearance could never replace evidence. At first, Rachel wondered whether she truly belonged there. Then she remembered Emily's final expression at the airport. There had been disappointment, but never contempt. That memory stayed with her. One rainy Thursday morning, Gate B14 filled with travelers escaping an approaching storm. Delayed departures had created long lines, tired families, and growing frustration throughout the terminal. Rachel stood calmly behind the boarding scanner. The atmosphere felt strangely familiar. Near the end of the line, she noticed an elderly man wearing faded work boots, an old denim jacket, and carrying a weathered canvas duffel bag. Several impatient passengers stepped around him as though he were slowing everyone else down. One traveler quietly muttered, "He's probably in the wrong line." Rachel heard the comment. 3 weeks earlier, she might have unconsciously reached the same conclusion. Not anymore. She welcomed the man with a warm smile. "Good morning, sir." He smiled back with visible relief. "Morning." She scanned his boarding pass. A notification appeared on her screen. For one brief moment, memories of Emily flashed across her mind. Rachel took a slow breath, then smiled again. "It looks like our system needs an additional verification." She turned the monitor slightly toward him. "Would you mind checking these details together with me?" The elderly man adjusted his glasses. "Oh, I entered my birth year incorrectly when I booked the ticket." "No problem at all." Rachel corrected the information in less than 30 seconds. "There we are." The updated boarding pass printed immediately. "You're all set." The man accepted it gratefully. "Thank you for treating me like a person." Rachel felt those words more deeply than he could possibly know. "Safe travels, sir." As he walked toward the jet bridge, another airline employee quietly approached. "You handled that differently." Rachel nodded. "I learned something recently." Across the terminal, William Harrison had been observing the interaction during an unannounced visit. He walked toward Rachel after boarding was complete. "I saw what happened." Rachel looked slightly embarrassed. "It wasn't anything extraordinary." William smiled. "Exactly. Respect shouldn't be extraordinary. She lowered her eyes thoughtfully. I almost forgot that once. You remembered. William glanced toward the departing aircraft. That's what matters. That afternoon, he sent a company-wide message to every Skyline Air employee. It contained no discussion of profits, no reference to contracts, no mention of technology. Only one sentence appeared beneath the company logo. Every passenger deserves dignity before they deserve recognition. Thousands of employees read those words before ending their shifts. Most never knew what had inspired them. Emily received a copy of the message later that evening. She read it once before quietly placing her phone aside. No interview could have achieved what genuine change had already begun accomplishing. Some victories never appear on financial statements. Some partnerships are measured not by dollars, but by the number of people whose lives become a little kinder because one person chose grace instead of revenge. And Emily believed those were always the investments with the greatest return. The greatest measure of change is not the speech people applaud. It is the quiet decision they make when no one is watching. 6 months later, Jefferson International Airport looked much the same. The polished floors still reflected streams of hurried travelers. Flight announcements echoed through the terminals. Rolling suitcases crossed the concourse from sunrise until long after sunset. But inside Skyline Air, something fundamental had changed. The Dignity Before Assumption initiative had become more than an internal program. Every newly hired employee completed it before working a single shift. Experienced supervisors attended workshops led not by outside consultants, but by colleagues who had learned difficult lessons firsthand. Among the instructors stood Rachel Dawson. She no longer introduced herself by her management title. Instead, she always began with the same sentence. I once confused appearance with evidence. The room invariably became quiet. She never mentioned Emily Carter by name unless someone specifically asked. The lesson was never about one extraordinary passenger. It was about every ordinary one. One afternoon, while Rachel finished another training session, William Harrison quietly entered the back of the classroom without interrupting. Dozens of employees listened as Rachel described the importance of slowing down before reaching conclusions. Verification protects security, she said. Respect protects humanity. The words felt simple, yet every person in the room wrote them down. When the session ended, William approached her. I've attended 5 of these classes. Rachel smiled. You never tell me beforehand. I prefer hearing the honest version. She laughed softly. I don't have another version anymore. William handed her a small envelope. Inside was a letter confirming her promotion to Director of Customer Experience Training for the entire airline network. Rachel stared silently at the page. I don't know what to say. Say yes. She looked up. After everything that happened? William nodded. Because of everything that happened. Tears briefly filled her eyes. I won't waste the opportunity. I know. Thousands of miles away, Emily Carter sat inside her office overlooking Seattle's skyline. Her assistant entered carrying several folders. One of these arrived personally. Emily opened the envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter. No company logo. No official stationery. Only careful handwriting. It was from Rachel. She thanked Emily for showing grace when anger would have been understandable. She described the new training program. She explained how hundreds of employees had already completed it. She ended with one final sentence. You changed my career by first changing my heart. Emily folded the letter carefully, then placed it inside the top drawer of her desk rather than throwing it away with the day's paperwork. Some achievements deserved to be remembered. That evening, as the sun disappeared beyond the city skyline, Emily stood beside her office window watching aircraft leave one after another for destinations across the country. She wondered how many strangers would meet on those flights. How many assumptions would never be made? How many quiet acts of kindness would happen without attracting attention? No newspaper would ever report those moments. No television camera would capture them. Yet those invisible victories mattered more than public recognition. Because real leadership does not end when applause fades. It continues inside people who choose to become better after witnessing dignity in action. And somewhere, at an airport gate filled with travelers who would never know her story, another passenger dressed in ordinary clothes smiled after being welcomed with simple respect. That single moment was the true legacy Emily Carter had hoped to leave behind. People often believe extraordinary stories end when justice is served. The truth is that the most meaningful endings begin when ordinary people choose to live differently, because of what they witnessed. 1 year later, Jefferson International Airport welcomed millions of travelers every month, each carrying destinations, responsibilities, and private stories no stranger could possibly know. Flights departed on schedule. Business meetings continued. Families reunited. Life moved forward almost exactly as it always had. Only those who worked there every day understood that something invisible had changed. Near Gate A27, a small bronze plaque had been placed beside the Employee Training Center. It carried no corporate slogans, no executive signatures, only one sentence. Every journey begins with respect. Most passengers walked past without noticing it. Employees noticed it every morning. Rachel Dawson always did. Now serving as Director of Customer Experience Training, she often paused for a brief moment before beginning another day. Not because she wanted to remember her worst mistake, but because she never wanted to repeat it. On one quiet afternoon, a young gate agent approached her. "I have a question." Rachel smiled. "Go ahead. What if someone looks suspicious, but I don't want to judge unfairly?" Rachel nodded thoughtfully. "Verify the facts." She paused, but never assumed the person. The young employee smiled. "I think I understand." Rachel gently corrected him. "No, you'll understand the first time someone surprises you." At that very moment, several terminals away, an ordinary-looking woman wearing jeans and carrying an inexpensive backpack stepped into a boarding line. No one knew she had founded a successful medical charity. No one needed to. She was welcomed with the same respect as everyone else. Exactly as she deserved. Thousands of miles away, Emily Carter received an invitation from Skyline Air. The company wanted to dedicate its new leadership academy in her honor. She politely declined. Instead, she suggested another name, the Dignity Leadership Center. William Harrison smiled when he read her response. That decision sounded exactly like Emily. She had never wanted recognition, only results. Months later, while attending another innovation conference, a journalist finally asked her about the airport incident that had quietly become a leadership case study in universities and business schools. "Were you ever angry?" Emily considered the question carefully. For a moment, she smiled softly. "But anger teaches very little. What did you hope would happen instead?" She looked toward the audience. "I hoped one difficult morning might prevent thousands of similar ones." The interviewer lowered his microphone. "I think it did." Emily simply smiled. She never claimed victory, because she understood that kindness could never be completed. It could only be continued. As evenings settled across the country, aircraft traced silver paths through darkening skies, carrying strangers who would never meet again after landing. Some wore expensive suits. Some wore worn-out jackets. Some carried designer luggage. Others carried everything they owned in a single bag. None of those things revealed their worth, only their destination. And somewhere inside every terminal, every boarding gate, every waiting room, and every quiet interaction between strangers, the lesson that began with one denied boarding pass continued traveling farther than any airplane ever could. Because titles may open doors, wealth may command attention, but genuine dignity asks for neither. It simply reminds the world that every person deserves respect before they have to earn recognition. And on that unforgettable morning, the people at Gate A27 did not merely recognize a CEO. They finally remembered what humanity looks like.